Hi, I'm John. When I was younger, I used to think that old people had interesting stories to tell. Now I find that I qualify as an old people, so I thought maybe some of you would like to know how it was growing up nearly a century ago in the 1930s and 1940s. The historical events of that time were the 1930s was the Great Depression, and the 1940s was World War II. Sometimes when I was a teacher, a student would ask, how was life like back in the olden days? So I'd play along and I'd say, well, we lived in a cave, but we had fire, and every morning Dad would leave with a club over his shoulder to go out to hunt dinosaurs. They would nod knowingly as if to say, just as I thought. Actually, life was not quite that primitive, but it was certainly a very great deal different from today, when we have so many labor-saving devices. Women of that era were known as housewives, which kind of sounds like they were married to the house, doesn't it? And in a way, they were. Without the labor-saving devices that we have today, they were bound to the house with chores that we dismiss as easy today. For example, on Monday, that was wash day for my mom. As soon as Dad and the kids were off to school, Mom would begin her wash day. Her washing machine was just one step above a wash tub and a wooden paddle. It agitated the clothes, but it did not spin them dry. There were no automatic dryers. So when Mom washed the clothes, she drained the water out of the washing machine by unfastening a hose from the side and letting the water run out into the drain. When it came time to wring the water out, she used a set of vertically placed rollers. She'd insert the clothes in, and with a hand crank, she would dry them partially. If she had enough money, she would buy an electric motor, which would run the hand crank for her. But those motors were dangerous. If you were careless in putting the clothes into the wringers, you also inserted your hand, which was a little bit hard on the fingers. There was a safety switch on the electric motor, but by the time you reached it, it was too late. My mom hurt her hands a number of times in that way. What happened to the clothes after they were wrung out was, in the summer, they were hung out on a clothesline in the backyard with clothespins. Mom used to love the smell of the freshly dried sheets. In the winter, she hung them in the basement. When I'd come home on Monday, I'd find the windows of the house filled with steam from the humidity of drying the clothes. This was probably the only day in Minnesota winters that the house felt comfortable. The rest of the time, Mom had to put a kettle of water boiling on the stove to humidify the house. One day, she forgot about the kettle, and it kind of melted on the electric coils, and they fused into one. She wasn't at all happy. Tuesday was ironing day for my mom. It took her all day. The clothes of that era were universally made of cotton. There was no wash and wear, and if the clothes weren't ironed, they simply looked awful, terribly wrinkled. So Mom had to iron almost everything we wore. And she, being a good Polish housewife, ironed the sheets and the handkerchiefs and the socks and the underwear, and anything else that she washed got ironed. It took her all day on Tuesday to do that ironing. Wednesday was shopping day. Since my mom had no car, she had to walk 2 blocks to the bus stop, summer and winter, and she had to dress up because in her mind, going to the store was like going to church. She had to look her very best. On Wednesdays, she bought everything that was necessary for us for the week. The groceries could be purchased in a store that for a small fee, they would deliver them to your house. But everything else, my mom had to carry home on the bus. By the time she got home on Wednesday afternoon, she was pretty well beat. But this being the Great Depression, she was never too tired to check every item in the grocery box against the receipt to make sure that she had not been shorted or cheated. If she was, she made sure the grocery store made it right on her next visit. Furnaces in those days were really primitive. In our house, the furnace was little more than a pot-bellied stove with a vent extending upstairs that deposited the warm air into a central area of the house. For people who had more money, there were extra vents coming off the furnace that would take the heat to the far corners of the house. As a little kid, I remember being afraid to go down the basement in one of those houses because the furnace looked like an octopus, and basements were dark and dreary places anyway, so I never went down there without an adult. The fuel for these furnaces was coal. Coal was delivered by a man who came and opened a basement window and with a chute unceremoniously dumped a ton of coal onto the basement floor. My father had to use a scoop shovel to take this coal over to open the furnace door and shovel it in. For people who had a little more money, they had a machine called a stoker. The coal would be put into the stoker and an auger would take it into the furnace, and it was more of an automatic project. When natural gas became available in our community, everybody immediately switched to natural gas because it was not only more convenient, it was cheaper. From the time I can first remember, we lived in a house that had no refrigerator, but it did have what was called an ice box. It had a door on the inside like refrigerators today, but it had a second door on the outside where the iceman could deposit huge chunks of ice. On the days the iceman was to come, my mother would put a sign in the window that read 25, 50, 75, 100, and whichever number was facing upward, the iceman would deposit blocks of ice that weighed that amount into our ice box. As a little kid, I remember being fascinated by the ice delivery man. He had huge tongs that grasped these big chunks of ice, and he had an insulated rubber pad on his shoulder to keep it from freezing. And he would bring these tremendously heavy chunks of ice, open the door, and put it into the refrigerator, the ice box. When about 1940, mechanical refrigerators became common, my mom got one. You'd laugh at the freezer compartment today. It was about 10 inches square. It had room for 4 trays of ice cubes, and beside it there was room for 2 of what we call bricks of ice cream. The ice cream came in cardboard boxes that looked like bricks, and you could put 2 bricks in the freezer. That's all you needed the freezer for. There wasn't such a thing as frozen foods. All foods were canned or they were fresh. Milk from those days didn't come from the supermarket in plastic containers. They came from a milkman who delivered the milk to our doorstep every day and put the bottles of milk, glass bottles of milk, in an insulated container. It was important that these containers be insulated to keep the milk from boiling in the summertime, but more important, to keep them from freezing in the wintertime. Sometimes they would freeze. They had easy-to-open caps on the top, and the children were very delighted when the milk froze and the cap popped out and you had an inch of frozen milk in your house. Let me read to you a paragraph I've written about the most important and dramatic event of the 1940s. When World War II began in December of 1941, it brought along with it something that we know nothing about today: rationing. Production of all consumer goods ceased almost immediately, and American industry was devoted exclusively to the war effort. Instead of producing cars and refrigerators and silk stockings, industry now produced guns and tanks and parachutes. There were no new automobiles produced from 1942 until 1946, and no new tires either. This was particularly difficult because cars did not last very long, and tires were not very good, lasting only 15 or 20,000 miles. Gas was rationed. Each family got enough to take them to work and 2 extra gallons per week for pleasure. Think about that. 2 gallons a week. Cars got 12 to 15 miles per gallon, so families did not travel very far for pleasure. Speed limits on the highway were reduced to 35 miles an hour, not only to save gasoline, but because tires were so bad they were prone to blow out at any moment. Shoes, sugar, eggs, butter. It seemed that everything was rationed. My mother would have to save the ration stamps for weeks for sugar and eggs to make my favorite birthday cake every December. Silk stockings were especially desired by American women. They were attached at the top by garters, which were attached to girdles, sometimes called hinderbinders. Women my mother's age wouldn't be seen in public without a girdle. Too much wiggle in the walk, I guess. When I think about the gifts that are lavished on young people today, I remember my own youth. When I was about 13, I expressed an interest in basketball. My birthday is in December, so for my birthday, I got a regulation basketball. And for Christmas, I got a regulation hoop and net. That was all the presents I received. And we were a middle-class family. When I was 9 years old, I got my first job. I went to the paper office and asked for a job, and they gave me one, delivering 100 newspapers every day, 365 days a year for 4 years. Every Saturday, I had to go collect the money that was owed me. The newspaper office got 2/3, and I got 1/3. How many 9-year-old kids have bills to pay? But I learned to be a little businessman. I learned how to make change, how to greet people, and how to be reliable for 4 years. When I quit to play sports at age 13, when I was 14, I went to work at a country club as a caddy. Didn't have golf carts in those days, so the golfers either had to carry the bags themselves or hire a kid to do it. Most preferred to hire a kid. We really liked weekends because there were more golfers than kids, and we got to carry a double. And some of those bags were pretty heavy, weighing 30 pounds or more. We carried the double in the morning, another double in the afternoon, and we were happy because we earned lots of money. The course was about 5 miles long, so during the day we walked maybe 10 miles. If we didn't get a ride in from one of the members, we walked 4 miles to the home. Didn't think anything about it. That's the way things were done. At age 15, I got my first full-time job, 40 hours a week. The law said you had to be 16, but I lied. Boy, was that a good feeling to be able to earn, even though it was minimum wage. I got paid for 40 hours a week, and I was proud. At age 16, I went to work on construction. You were supposed to be 18, but I was tall. Nobody asked. I bought my own car at age 16, $75. That would be about $750 today. And for the succeeding years, I always bought my own car. The next car cost $100. And I really splurged. The next one was $125. And I paid for those cars myself out of my earnings. I paid for my insurance. I paid all the costs of that car. And that's just the way it was. At age 17, I got my favorite construction job that I ever had. It was working for a sewer contractor, and why I liked it was we worked 10-hour days, 5 days a week, and 4 hours on Saturday. What was good about that was I was a union laborer, and union laborers got paid pretty good money back then. So when I got a 40-hour week and 14 hours of overtime, what that meant was I was earning more money than any man in our neighborhood, perhaps even my father, who was a pretty successful man. And I can't help but thinking that it's that sort of thing that gives kids confidence that we deny them today. So, enough of my adventures for now, and I'm happy to have you watch my channel. I hope that you will subscribe. Maybe I can share some information with you that you might find interesting. So with that, I'm going to say bye-bye for now.